So today I'm in New York and I'm talking with Dee Poon, who is in Hong Kong. And I know you're going to find this an interesting conversation. I met Dee for the first time several years ago and found her perspective on the world, especially because she bridges both the West and Asia, really a perfect background for the conversation we're going to have. So, welcome to Conversation 360 Podcast, Dee, and this Asia and the West series. I'm delighted you're able to talk with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan.
Well, this is going to be fun, I think. When we talk about the conversations taking place between Asia and the West, what does that bring to mind for you? What does that mean?
I think it really feels as though often it's a very one-way conversation in the sense that I don't think people in the West get to hear much from us out here, just perhaps because of the way the media works, the global, entertainment, news system, and language, right? I mean, everybody out here, not everybody, but really, a lot more people in Asia speak English than Americans or Europeans speaking any of the Asian languages. So, I don't think there's much of a conversation at a broad level, although obviously at higher levels with people who travel or work across borders, then, you start to see more.
So have you noticed, since you've lived both in the West and the East, and you went back after college back to Hong Kong, have you noticed that the dialogue has shifted at all during this last decade? Is there more of it, or does it still seem to you to be still that kind of one-sided thing? Has that shifted at all?
I definitely think it's shifted. I still think it's often dominated by a Western, I'm just saying at a very broad level, right? So it is much more likely for the average Chinese person to know who Tom Cruise is than for the average American to know who, Zhou Jielun is. Does that make sense?
Yes,
so I'm saying in
absolutely.
a very broad sense.
Well, in fact, one of my questions was how accurate is the Chinese understanding of the West, and I think you'd argue that it's not bad. That or is there still a misunderstanding on the part of Chinese about what is the West and how do these people think?
I think that right now, Susan, I think we're all questioning what we understand about ourselves. I think there have been a lot of surprises last year everywhere. And this question, what do we understand about you and what do you understand about me, has really, I think, exploded because we all suddenly realized we don't really understand ourselves.
That's such a thoughtful answer. I think you're absolutely right, that the more we see that surprises us in the world around us, we're thinking, well, wait a minute, what do I know? I certainly think that you're right that this conversation has been somewhat a one way, and not because there hasn't been curiosity on the side of Asia, but perhaps more that there has been a lack of curiosity or just misinformation on the part of the West. And that's my own observation, but I think I'm not alone in that. I think, you epitomize what some of us think of as the new China in terms of you're taking a leadership role in the company that your mother owns, as I understand it, and you're leading
business.
What did you say? Sorry.
It's a family business,
right?
In the sense that, yeah.
And you're really revitalizing it, I think, or that's the intention. And you've got involvements even now in London and New York, not just business involvements, but you're involved in museums and other activities. Do I have that right? Did I get that right?
Yes. I mean, I guess because I went to school in the States, there are a lot of cultural opportunities that I miss while I'm in Asia. And not to say, I think since I've been back, since, the late 90s, early 2000s, actually before that, but, the art scene in China has really exploded, so it's very interesting. But I find that there's a lot to learn from the institutions in the West. So I do engage with, whether it's MoMA or the Tate or Lincoln Center. These are, I just find them fascinating how they work, what they do, how they think about culture, really, and its engagement with the rest of the world. I mean, I had a lot of fun there.
Well, it certainly adds to your real sense of being a global citizen, I would think, and I think you really epitomize that. Let me go in another direction. Has the recent slowdown in the Chinese economy, has that had an impact on your business, and what is that all about? What's happening, and is there a major impact that you note?
I think the thing about the slowdown in the Chinese economy is that it was moving very, very quickly from a smaller base, and it's now moving slightly slower at a higher base. And so, at 6.5% GDP growth, it's still a lot.
It's huge.
And you look around, I know. Yeah, especially compared to many other places, right? So I think when you walk around Beijing or Shanghai or even, the smaller cities, you don't feel as though people have this doom and gloom, oh my God, our economy is doing badly. It's not that type of feeling. Now, in Hong Kong, you get that a little bit. But in China, on the mainland, you really don't. And so I think people are still very energized to try to do more or to try to do things.
And you're talking here of mainland China, right? That there's just this real sense of anticipation, aspiration, ambition that has really been true for the last 30 years, and they're still fed by that. Is what you're saying, even though technically there is this slowdown. The fact is, it still appears to be not felt negatively on an individual basis, as far as your sense of that is. You mentioned that. You mentioned that it might be a little bit different in Hong Kong. I was just in Hong Kong, I think, in the last couple of weeks, and it's interesting how several people noted, and they seem to be speaking in unison, even though they were separate conversations, that their sense is that Hong Kong is in a bit of a malaise, or that it's not what it used to be, sort of kind of conversation. What's that all about?
I think Hong Kong has just been in a bit of a funk where, we've been very, in some ways we are lucky, and in some ways, we are unlucky, but we've been very affected by the world around us. And so, whether it was as a colony or today as a part of China, what we see is that as the economic winds around Hong Kong change, that affects what we do here and what we're able to do here. So Hong Kong is not able to be an independent I don't want to use the word governing because that now has a political bent, but what I mean is like one where we're able to drive what we do very much, as a service economy, as really a gateway. What happens around us leads to our being able to do things or not do things or have things done to the city. And I think that's, one of the things that has contributed to this funk. I think also, obviously, the social and political situations or currents and the feelings amongst younger people, especially students, and really quite a gridlock in the government seems to have made things a little bit, not so bright and sunny for the moment.
And it sounds like a true contrast to what you described as the continued ambition and anticipation on the part of the same age group. And
again, I don't think that every single person in China is happy and excited about their future. So please don't get me wrong. Okay.
Agreed.
There are many problems in China, including air pollution, for example, that lead to people being concerned about their futures.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think Hong Kong feels a little stagnant. And I think it's possibly, again, maybe it's just our culture, in the sense that Hong Kong people really like to complain. And we like to, you know, it's smaller things lead to bigger things. And I don't know.
Well,
But
it's
yeah, it's not that
interesting.
it's
Yeah.
all sunshine on one side and all doom and gloom on the other. There's obviously, it's probably like 60-40 in both, or maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, right?
Well, we do know that in mainland China, people are saying that some of the brightest and the wealthiest are actually leaving China, or at least having their money leave mainland China. Do you see evidence of that? So not everybody's thrilled.
I think if you have a lot of money, you're probably going to have some of it in different places.
Mm-hmm. That just seems intelligent. So it's not
right?
It's not so much a question of.
Mm-hmm. I think you can read. Look, what I'm trying to say is, I think you can read something in any possible way. So I don't know. Is it, oh my God, let's get our money out of China, or is it, this is a diversification strategy, or is it, it could be a lot of things. Are there a lot of people with a lot of things outside? Yeah. But again, I think people around the world naturally also like to have options. Does that seem like it makes sense? I don't know. I mean, I grew up, and a lot of people around me had dual citizenship. Mm-hmm. It was almost a fact, and that probably says something about where I grew up and, the type of society I lived in. But it seemed very normal, and so I understand how, if you read this, a statement like, many Chinese put money overseas to get it out of the country. I see how that reads, and I appreciate what that means, but I also appreciate that it could be not that big of a deal.
That it's simply a diversification method. I'm sure there's a little of both. For those that are staying, and we think that's most everybody, it seems as if China's innovation capability is more important than ever, because it has changed its economy, or is attempting to do so, from being the manufacturing center of the world to a more internally focused economy. And I'm fascinated by where that innovation is coming from. We can just look at Alibaba and a couple other companies and know, oh my gosh, this is a highly innovative population. So where does it come from? It's not particularly expats at this point, I wouldn't think. It could be people like you who've been educated in the West and return in these cases to mainland China and share whatever it is they've learned in terms of independent thinking and so on. Or is it homegrown, or is it a little of each? Do you have any sense of that?
I think it's a little bit of each. I have friends from both categories. Mm-hmm. And I think, obvious, like a lot of, I was at a talk the other day. A friend of mine had a definition for innovation that now I don't remember, but, it sort of incorporated these ideas of like creating something new, but within like a context that, and I think the innovation in China comes because people see a lot that's going on around them, and they have things they want to do to make that better.
Yes, I think
that's where innovation comes from anywhere, right? I don't mean it on a societal level. I mean, it's like, we cannot get a taxi. This is our version of this taxi system.
Yeah, I think that when in the work that I've done, I find that people sort of define innovation in two ways. One is highly disruptive, the thing that didn't exist before and suddenly it appears on the scene. We didn't even know we needed it. Probably the iPhone, the initial Steve Jobs kind of work is regarded as that kind of disruptive thing. And then there is the other kind of innovation, which actually takes something that exists right now but improves on it in such a way that it really does shift the way that thing is used, or the way that service is promulgated. And my sense is that mainland China has a lot of the latter, and both are obviously pretty valuable. and maybe the second one is the one that you can actually train towards. Um, because I'm sort of
Yeah,
fascinated.
transformational change, right?
Yeah, exactly, and I
I mean,
think that's
rather than
pretty interesting
disruptive.
because if you look at
And
Alibaba,
I
for
think the other
example,
reason,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think one of the reasons is because China was where you made things. And so you had a closeness to, to the machine that made it. You had a closeness to be able to change certain things. So like, I read something about this a while ago, probably in like the New York Times, but the culture of tinkering with things and how, you have hardware startups. Like all of those guys do it in China because that's where you build hardware. Whereas in the U.S., everything is around software.
Oh, that's an interesting distinction.
So it's also, yeah. So it also has to do with the tools available to you rather than just, how bright you are. Because I think we have hit a point where we have very good education in China, and we have a lot of people traveling overseas to be educated. And, so I think it becomes about what the local context provides to you that is distinctive rather than just saying, oh, now we have smarter people who have more exposure, like the other people overseas.
So Dee, would you say that overall you're bullish about mainland China and its future, despite the challenges that you already mentioned, one of them of air pollution? Um,
Yes, I think so.
And what's the biggest source
I
of
mean, I
your
think,
optimism?
I see a lot of, I think it's just, there's literally so much creativity. Somebody from one of our factories, he used to work with us. He, he went off and he decided to start a restaurant. And so he's telling us about the process of his starting a restaurant in our local factory town. And he says, oh, you can't register a name. Every possible name to register a business is taken. And, you sort of, I mean, it's crazy. And, I've actually gone through that process myself, trying to do, brands. And there's just so many opportunities. He said, the way he furnished the restaurant, he's like, oh, and using things like Tmall Express, and like there's so much energy and desire and creativity that I feel as though things, may take a few. The air thing, I think, bothers a lot of people, especially in the winter. And I think that, yes. And, some people are better at dealing with it than others, but I personally find it quite literally depressing, But at the same time, again, the energy and the creativity at a mass level is something that I don't feel like I encounter that often. So I find that very exciting.
The problem of air pollution is certainly a big one, and it's certainly the Chinese government is certainly saying that they're going to be doing something about it. And the sense is, even in the West, I think people think that the Chinese are really serious about this. Are there other things that you think really challenge this whole optimistic future that could get in the way? What other things do you think of as major challenges to this positive?
Oh, I mean, there are so many that, it's interesting. We were at our annual business conference last week, and somebody asked a question and said, how do we deal when the world is so uncertain? And our CEO, John, he got up and he said, uncertainty, the world has always been uncertain. We've never really been able to look into the future at all, right? Like with any certainty. But the problem with today is not that there's uncertainty, but that the world is unpredictable. So, it's actually it's chaotic, and it's beyond the realm often of rational expectation. I think, just things happen. And I think that's probably what scares people, is you just don't know, right? Like, ooh. And I think that goes right back to the first question of like, do you know me? Do I know you? I mean, I think that's, the best thing we can have now are personal relationships, because then at least, if we can know each other as people, then maybe we can't make broad sweeping statements about cultures and places and peoples, but we can say, I know this person and this person is a good person, and I can have a dialogue or some type of communication, like a proper discussion, right? No, not ideologues, not me throwing ideas at you and you throwing them back at me and we're not listening to each other. But I think that's the thing that, if you ask me if there was one thing I would hope most for the world and for humanity, it really is just that, we listen more. And that's really how we're going to do well in the future.
I think that's so well said, Dee. That's really the purpose of this podcast series, is to give people an opportunity to just hear how people who are in another part of the world, especially these two particular parts of the world, because they are the two largest economies, how people are thinking, how they go about their business, what their views are on things, because it sort of humanizes, as you say, it brings it down to the personal, and then it seems quite understandable, and people are less apt to, as you say, make broad sweeping statements that don't have much basis in fact. There's another thing that's occurred recently that I'm finding fascinating, and that is Alibaba's purchase of the South China Morning Post. And I was so interested that they recently installed a Chinese American. I don't know if you've met him yet. Have you met this guy, Gary Liu, who's fascinating?
No, he came from Reddit or Dig
from
or something?
From Dig, and before that, Spotify and AOL, and he's a real techie. But he grew up in his early childhood was in Taiwan and New Zealand, and then he came to the States, not unlike you, for prep school, and then stayed for college at Harvard, and then he got into the tech world. So my fascination is that this 113-year-old journalistic institution has somehow decided that it can install technology in such a way that could be a real global player. And I think that's fabulous. My question is, can it remain this independent, objective? Because if it does, if it's able to really present the news about China in a way that is objective, that would be a boon to the very thing that you're talking to, which is that it gives more people an opportunity to learn about this part of the world, Asia, specifically China, in a way that they didn't have access to before. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that. Can it be that independent? Are there people talking about this in a way that could shed any light on that?
I think the point about the SCMP was known in Hong Kong as the English newspaper.
Yeah, I've heard people say that.
Of course, it's relevant because people. I mean, there are a lot of people in Hong Kong who do not read Chinese, right? And historically, if you're a banker, right, if you come and run Goldman Sachs, probably you don't read Chinese. So there's a relevance to the newspaper beyond its value as a newspaper. It wasn't a great newspaper, unfortunately, for a long time. It was a very commercial newspaper, and I think, again, look, I don't want to put words in the mouths of Jack Ma or Joe Tsai. So I'm not going to pretend that I have any insight into this. But I remember when they bought it, there was an article that, where Joe basically said his goal was to create a type of media that would do exactly what you said, right? Like that would show what was going on out here to an English-speaking world. I mean, it's only been 6 months, and I can tell you, at least from the technology side, it's working a lot better. I have the app now; it sends me notifications when things happen. It's functioning, but as to the content, I still don't really go there for content. I do, sort of like occasionally like local things. But I think it takes time. I think it takes a lot of time to build up editorial credibility on a large scale. Does that seem fair?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it is truly still early. In fact, this new CEO has been in the job a couple of weeks. But what's interesting to me
Yeah.
about that is the opportunity that it does present for people, as you say, in the English speaking world, to get access, especially because of social media, if they do it right. It could be that voice that could shed light and bring a little more information to other parts of the world that didn't have an accurate source of it. In fact, didn't even have the
Yeah,
curiosity about it. So that's hopeful, I think.
but it's
I'm
so
just going to be
interesting,
interested.
right? Because I completely appreciate, like, I completely appreciate and completely agree with what you're saying, and it would be fantastic. But it's sort of like I used to read the New York Times every day, and this was a habit I had, growing up on the East Coast and whatnot. But I think this last American election cycle suddenly really just blew my brain apart, right? And it was so obvious where this newspaper stood. And I suddenly just realized that everything comes within a context. And our job as people who are engaged or interested is really not to put, and I'm sorry to say this, for people who own media, and I still love the Times, I love the Economist, I love the FT. I mean, I love reading a lot of different things, but I think today we do need to go beyond any single source and actually go out of our ways to find different views, which is something that is very hard for a single source to do, because they are the context, or they're creating the context, right?
Yes, and you put it
So
very
no
well.
matter how good the post is, I still think that it will be great to have a voice, but we will need more than one, and we will need many so that we can build up this, a better picture.
Yeah, I think you put it very well earlier when you said that we haven't been listening, or we haven't listened well enough. And by we, I mean, people in all parts of the world.
Yeah, everybody.
We have gotten, and social media has tended to make us sort of create our own little ecosystem around ourselves. So we were really hearing what other people who think a lot like us were thinking, and we thought, gee, we're so smart, we really have it. We figured it out. And of course, we hadn't figured it out at all. As you said, there were a lot of surprises over this last year. So this is an interesting time, I think, and a real opportunity for us to sort of open up our ability to communicate, and especially importantly between these two parts of the world. So I'm fascinated to hear your perspective, and I think it will be interesting to people that hear this. So thank you. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think is an important piece, or that you think of when you consider the issues that are between Asia and the West? Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to mention?
No, I mean, I think I'd just invite everybody to come and visit. I went to South America this Christmas, and until you hit the ground, until you get there, right? Like, it was the same with India. Until you get there, you don't get the feeling. And so I just hope everyone will come and visit and see or smell China.
That's so well said.
And
Yeah. We need more of that. I was just saying to somebody the other day, I just wish that there were a global requirement that somehow there was a global exchange program that everybody had to spend 2 years of their life in some other part of the world. I think we wouldn't have world wars. Maybe it's too simplistic, but
sadly, that I was about to say, that probably is the definition of world war, when people are picked up and sent to different places. But anyway.
Well, this is great. Well, thank you so much. Dee, this is great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for participating. Bye-bye.
Yes, we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.